In today's video, I want to give you an update on what this Iran war is actually costing you. Not in terms of lives, not in terms of geopolitics. I am talking about your wallet, your grocery bill, your mortgage, your next flight. Because while we are all watching the news coming out of the Middle East, something is happening to your finances right now, and nobody in Washington is being straight with you about it. Let me be very clear about what the data is showing us. 1 month ago, the average 30-year fixed-rate mortgage dipped below 6% for the first time in 3 years. Today, that same mortgage rate is sitting at 6.64%. That is not a small move. That is not a rounding error. That is a direct and immediate hit to every single American who is hoping to buy a home this spring. And it happened in a matter of weeks. So if you are sitting on the sidelines waiting for the right moment to buy a house, the Iran war just made that decision a lot harder. It's as simple as that. Now, before I take you through the full picture, I want you to understand the core mechanism here because once you see it, everything else will make sense. About 20% of the world's oil comes from the Gulf region, and most of it is shipped on massive tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway is only 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. More than 20 million barrels transit through that strait every single day, which is 1/5 of global petroleum consumption. 1/5. And right now, that strait is effectively shut down. Since the Iran war began, marine traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has nearly ground to a halt. Attacks on vessels and interference with navigation equipment have pushed most operators to anchor their ships at the waterway's edge rather than risk the crossing. So when that much oil stops moving, the price of everything that depends on oil goes up. And I want you to really think about what depends on oil. Gas, obviously, but also jet fuel, fertilizer, plastics, packaging, shipping, the truck that brings food to your grocery store. All of it, every single link in the supply chain runs on oil. And right now, the biggest oil artery in the world is basically closed for business. Take a look at what that has done to prices in real time. In just the first week after President Trump bombed Iran, the average price of gasoline in the United States increased 48 cents per gallon. Now, gas prices nationally are sitting at close to $4 a gallon. In California's gasoline prices surged above $5 per gallon during the second week of March 2026. $5 a gallon. That is a gut punch to millions of working Americans who have no choice but to drive to work every single day. But you might say, Brian, what are you talking about? That is just gas prices. That is not the end of the world. And to that I would say, listen, this is about a lot more than what you pay at the pump. Let me show you exactly where else this pain is spreading. Let us talk about your mortgage first because this one is hitting people hard. One day before the strikes on Iran began, the average rate on a 30-year fixed loan was 5.99%. It is now hovering around 6.5%, and it is still climbing. The average 30-year fixed mortgage rate rose to 6.38% this week, climbing for the 4th straight week to levels not seen in more than 6 months. It's the largest one-week jump in mortgage rates since April 2025, when markets were rattled by President Trump's initial tariff announcement. Now I want to show you how this actually works, because the mainstream media glosses over this. The 30-year mortgage rate is benchmarked to the rate of the 10-year Treasury note. The 10-year Treasury is up to 4.39%, up from about 3.96% from before the start of the war. So what happens is this. Oil prices spike because of the Strait of Hormuz being closed. Investors get nervous about inflation. They demand higher yields to hold US government debt. Those yields go up. And because mortgages are priced off of those yields, your mortgage rate goes up right along with it. That chain of events is happening right now in real time. Aside from higher mortgage rates, increased energy costs and stock market volatility associated with the war have caused 1 in 4 Americans to pause big purchases like homes and cars, according to a Redfin report. 1 in 4 Americans on pause. This is crushing the spring home buying season, which was supposed to be the market's big recovery moment this year. Now let us talk about your flights, because if you are planning travel, I need you to hear this. Aviation has been significantly disrupted due to the closure of airspace on key flight corridors between Africa, Asia, and Europe. Airlines have been rerouting flights along longer flight paths that circumnavigate the Middle East, adding to journey time and fuel costs. And here is the number that should wake you up. The war more than doubled the price of kerosene-based products like diesel and jet fuel, as refineries lack certain types of crude oil. Many airlines have increased ticket prices or canceled flights to maintain cash flow. Doubled. The price of jet fuel more than doubled. Do you think airlines are absorbing that cost out of the goodness of their hearts? Absolutely not. They are passing every single penny of it to you, the traveler. Airspace closures in the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and other Gulf states have led to over 4,000 daily flight cancellations, stranding hundreds of thousands of passengers. 4,000 flights a day canceled. And the ripple effects of that reach airports here in the United States. Now let us shift to your grocery bill, because this is where the long-term damage gets really unsettling. Grocery prices are up 3.9% over the last year, and Iran's blockade is throttling the global supply of fertilizer, which could create new pressures on food prices come harvest season. And when I say blockade is throttling the supply of fertilizer, I want you to understand what that means for the food on your table months from now. Fertilizers from the Gulf are needed soon for spring planting. Delays could affect crops next year. So what you are looking at is not just a spike at the grocery store this week. You are looking at a potential wave of higher food prices that stretches into next year and beyond, because the crops that will be planted this spring may be short on fertilizer. The war could also result in higher prices for foods that are primarily imported, including coffee and tropical or off-season produce, since global shipping is so heavily reliant on fossil fuels. Higher crude oil prices will impact food packaging costs as well. And combined with rising transportation and fertilizer costs, multiple pieces of the food supply chain are facing pressures that can push up grocery prices. Multiple pieces of the food supply chain, that is not one thing. That is not two things. That is everything hitting at once. But here's the question I know some of you are asking right now. Brian, why is this happening? We produce oil here in America. We are energy independent. Why are we getting hammered by a war in the Middle East? Great question. Let me show you the answer, because this is where the real story differs from the propaganda you are being fed. The truth is, in the United States, despite record levels of domestic fuel production, prices are more exposed than ever to global fuel interruptions after a decade of building infrastructure meant to link domestic supply to overseas markets. Let me translate that for you. Our oil industry spent 10 years building pipelines and terminals specifically so that they could sell American oil to foreign markets at higher prices. That is great for oil company profits. But the side effect is that now our domestic supply is tied directly to global prices. So when the Strait of Hormuz shuts down, we feel the full weight of it even though we produce oil here at home. And critically, the Trump administration neglected to refill the nation's strategic petroleum reserve, which leaves the economy further exposed to supply shocks. The safety net that was supposed to buffer us from exactly this kind of scenario, it was left empty. Now I want to talk about inflation, because this is the issue that ties all of this together. And the numbers are genuinely alarming. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development this week projected U.S. inflation will reach 4.2% this year. Before the war, the International Research and Policy Group had projected 3% U.S. inflation, 4.2%. And here's what makes that number so dangerous. Consumer prices are up 25% since December 2020. So we are not talking about 4% on top of normal prices. We are talking about 4% on top of prices that already went up 25% over the last 5 years. People are not just struggling, they are exhausted. We are being told by the politicians and by mainstream media that this is a temporary disruption, that once the war ends, prices will come back down, that we should trust the process. But here's what the data actually says. Even if the strait is reopened, enough damage may have been done already to leave energy and many other prices higher for longer. When those stopgap measures lose their effectiveness in early to mid-April, analysts warn there will be little the US or other governments can do to keep energy prices from rising dramatically. Higher for longer, that is the phrase you need to burn into your memory. Not temporary, not a blip, higher for longer. And this feeds directly into the Federal Reserve's decision-making on interest rates. Because here is the trap they are walking into. Higher oil prices likely point to inflation remaining stickier, which means it's harder for the Fed to cut interest rates. As a result, mortgage rates and other long-term interest rates might be stuck at their current levels. So the Fed wanted to cut interest rates this year. Americans were counting on that to get some relief on mortgages and borrowing costs. But now they cannot cut rates because oil-driven inflation is running hot. And because they cannot cut rates, mortgage rates stay elevated, home purchases freeze up, and the consumer keeps getting squeezed. And nobody in the White House is being honest with you about this connection. Trump posted on Truth Social short-term oil prices, which will drop rapidly when the destruction of the Iran nuclear threat is over, is a very small price to pay for USA and world safety and peace. Only fools would think differently. A very small price to pay. That is the official narrative. But the data does not support that at all. Every sustained $10 per barrel increase in oil could cost an average US household close to an extra $450 each year. And we are not talking about a $10 increase. We are talking about oil that has gone from $72 a barrel to over $100 a barrel. You do the math on what that means for the average American family's annual budget. And the projection on inflation is what really concerns me because we have all been through this before. Economists point to the crises of 1973, 1978, and 2008 as evidence that every significant spike in oil prices has been followed in some form by a global recession. Every single time. And the word that is being whispered right now on Wall Street and in economic circles is stagflation. That is when you have high inflation and a stagnant or shrinking economy at the same time. Fears about a stagflationary scenario are back, with a fresh inflationary shock coming alongside new signs of labor market weakness. They are living in ignorance, living in bliss if they think this is going to resolve itself quickly and cleanly. The writing is on the wall. Morgan Stanley warns that prolonged conflict with Iran could lead to higher oil prices, hotter inflation, and greater market uncertainty. Defense spending could raise deficits further. U.S. engagement with Iran could increase defense spending close to the president's $1.5 trillion defense spending request. A 50% increase to the defense budget, which would add more to the U.S. government's already outsized debt and deficits, putting further upward pressure on Treasury yields. More debt, higher yields, which means higher mortgage rates, which means more Americans locked out of homeownership. It is a cycle that accelerates. Here's my prediction on where this goes from here, and I want you to pay attention because I think this is exactly what is going to happen. The Federal Reserve is not going to cut interest rates anytime soon. The CME Fed Watch tool currently shows a near zero probability of a rate cut at the April 29th meeting. The war is keeping inflation too elevated for Powell to move. And when the new Fed chair comes in, whoever that is, there is going to be enormous political pressure to cut rates anyway, to provide some relief. But if they cut rates while oil-driven inflation is still running hot, they risk unleashing a real inflationary spiral. That is the trap. The yield on the 10-year Treasury note has risen by roughly half a point over the course of the war to 4.4%, reflecting worries about inflation and the prospect that the Fed may not cut interest rates as it had hoped. If this conflict drags on through summer, we are going to be looking at mortgage rates back above 7%, grocery bills continuing to climb, flight prices staying elevated, and an already weakening labor market that we covered in our last video getting hit with an additional shock. Every sustained $10 per barrel increase could cost an average U.S. household close to an extra $450 each year, according to Zandy. And Goldman Sachs has already warned that inflation could snap back to 3% this year if the war drags on and oil prices keep rising. And Goldman had previously predicted inflation would ease to 2% by the end of the year. Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin said it plainly in a speech this week. Consumers are tired of high prices. They are deferring purchases, trading down, and moving to lower-priced retailers and private label. And the data suggests, he said, that progress on inflation may be at risk of stalling. That is a Federal Reserve official telling you that the gains we made on inflation are now being threatened. A Federal Reserve official, not some doom and gloom commentator on YouTube. The people running monetary policy in this country are concerned. The bottom line is this: the Iran war is not just a foreign policy event. It is an economic event that is landing directly in your home, at your dinner table, in your mortgage payment, and at the airport. The four biggest hits right now are clear. Mortgage rates up more than 60 basis points in 1 month. Gas prices up over 30% since the war began. Grocery inflation accelerating with fertilizer disruptions threatening more damage through harvest season. And flights being hit by double jet fuel prices with thousands of cancellations every single day. Listen, I am not here to tell you how to feel about the war. I am not here to debate the foreign policy. I am here to make sure you understand what is happening to your money, because that is what the mainstream media is not telling you clearly. They are focused on the battlefield. You need to be focused on your budget. This is exactly why you need to be paying attention to the data right now, not to the political talking points, not to the propaganda, the data. And the data says that this war is costing you real money right now today, and it is going to cost you more if this situation does not get resolved quickly. Subscribe to the channel so you get these updates daily. I am watching the situation closely, and I will bring you the numbers the moment they move. Thank you so much. Have a very nice day. Take care.